snow came on a wind that smelt of pine smoke and the far, clean bite of the sea. It found every gap in the stone and seeped into Winterfell's halls like a quiet host, softening edges, hiding scars, laying white upon the blackened places still pocked by the iron winter of men. Jon stood beneath the heart tree in the godswood and let the flakes seize in his hair, in the fur of his cloak, in the rough fur at Ghost's neck where it melted and steamed. The red eyes in the weirwood's carved face bled their resin tears into the pool, and the water, black as a raven's feather, wore a skin of ice that cracked in thin silver lines with each breath of the wind. He had not been Lord Commander for many days now. That life had ended on the knives and disbelief of men he had called brothers. Death, or something near to it, had slipped a black hand beneath his vows and returned it empty. When he woke to winter, to a castle with burned bones and stubborn stones, and to the old faces of the north gathered in its shadows like a forest of spears. "Snow," said a voice to his left, hard as frost. Lyanna Mormont was small and fierce as a wren, a strip of sable at her throat and her hair plaited close as a soldier's. "There's a raven from White Harbor." Ghost's ears pricked. Jon turned and the girl held out the canister with unceremonious efficiency. Skin sewn, eyes steady. The wax was Wyman Manderly's green, the fat merman impressed deep in its soft. He broke it and read as snow dotted the vellum. "Lord Stark," it said in a bold hand that had learned to speak even when a man's breath wheezed. Lord of Winterfell. He had never asked to see the name written in ink. He had never asked for the weight of it. Stannis had said the word first, thrust it at him like a sword that might save him or cut him in two. The clans had repeated it, the bold lads who remembered Robb as if he were a song, the grey men who remembered Lord Eddard as if he were iron. The godswood had said nothing. The ravens, when they came with news of dead boys and lost girls and Boltons gnawing like rats in the warm places, had croaked Lord, Lord, as if the word were a bone they could not swallow. He read, "The river froze this morning at the outer bends. Milchstand. Stores are counted. We have meat, we have flour, we have men enough to lift a banner. Yet ships we have none. And the sea brings strangers. Strangers had a name in the north that tasted of salt and old blood." Jon's mouth went dry. "There in the bite?" he asked, passing the letter to Lyanna. She bit the inside of her cheek as she read. "White sails. Manderly writes like an old woman. Too many words. Strangers means ironborn." The world narrowed to the sound of cracking ice. "Get my counsel," Jon said. "If the krakens are in our waters, I want them named and I want them gone." They came in ones and pairs, stamping snow from boots, shaking their coats, the old and the eager. Wyman Manderly came in his letters. Davos Seaworth came in flesh, sea salt caught in his beard and hands as battered as a hull. Melisandre the Red Woman warmed the air like a coal in the corner where she stood, quiet for once, flaming hair coiled under a hood. The girl Lyanna perched like a hawk on the bench near the table. A russet-cloaked Glover took a place, and great Jon Umber's kin with shoulders like beams, and a flint whose voice could cut rope. A map lay in the middle, the familiar northern coast set in pricked lines that had once been Robb's war table and were now his. Davos set his glove on the bite. "I saw them from the tower above the Merman's court," he said. "Bloody fools came on with a truce flag and their decks clean as a saint's bowl. I wanted a score of scorpions turned on them, but Lord Manderly, well, he's a man to count 3 and talk through 4 if you take me." "Tell it," Jon said. "The black wind led," Davos said, and a murmur ran among the clans. For the black wind was a name even winter could not bury. 2 more longships and a galley with a broken mainmast. They showed no flame and no slaves. They showed no reavers' trophies hung from their prow, no girls tied to the mast. They have a woman at their head who wears no iron collar and no men's beard. She sent a man ashore and asked for parley. "Asha Greyjoy," muttered Glover darkly. "The kraken's she-whelp. She raided Deepwood and danced her spears through our pines." "I know her," said Davos, and there was no favor in his tone. "Balon's daughter, sharp as a fish knife. She says she comes with empty hands and open eyes." Lyanna Mormont laughed once, a small sound. Empty hands steal quickest. What does she want? Jon asked. Davos looked to him, measuring. An audience with the Lord of Winterfell, he said. The silence that followed was a lowered drawbridge. Jon felt the weight of Ghost's gaze on his calf. Outside, the wind worried at the eaves like a dog that will not be turned aside. Send her, Jon said, and ring every bell between here and the river. Let all who breathe in these walls know what enters. Let all who carry a name remember the dead it carries too. They brought her up the stone steps with the snow still melting in her black hair. Asha Greyjoy walked as if the ground, being solid, were a thing to be negotiated. She wore a boiled leather jack over a mail shirt, a kraken-sewn ghost black on black. No rings of iron at her throat, though she had a strip of salt-tanned seal for a belt, and she smelt of rope, pitch, and sea wind. She had a cut at her knuckle that had not bled long ago. Her eyes were a gray too dark to be mocked. Her men waited in the yard, hands close to knives, knees loose. They blinked at the snow the way cats blink at rain. Jon saw hunger on their cheekbones and the hardness that comes when a people learn that the world will not give them anything it doesn't wrest free with bleeding fingers. She stopped before the table and looked at the map, then up at the men arrayed like small courts of winter. Winterfell, she said, and her smile was a line carved in an ice floe. I had not thought to walk its halls. I have come to ask for your time, Lord Snow. Lord Stark, Lyanna said sharply. Asha's glance flicked to the girl, curious and amused, then back. Names matter, she said. In my islands we make a prayer. What is dead may never die. In this hall, I suppose you pray that what is dead has the courtesy to stay down. Jon did not smile. Your letter said you came under truce. I came under truce, she said. I come because the sea is not what it was. My uncle sits Euron's chair with a crow's eye and a mouth that drinks sorcery. He sends our ships to the Greenlands with a promise of wine, gold, and dragons on the far horizon. He sends mutes to cut our tongues and teaches us to shout without sound. He will drown us all for the taste of a thing that bites back. I will not see my people made into stones to pave the way to his dream. And so you came north, Glover said hotly. So you came to the coasts you burned and the woods you pillaged, and you bring your empty hands with their clever fingers. Why do you speak here, Ironborn? You have nothing we want. I have ships, Asha said. I have men who can sail in water the color of iron, through teeth of ice, and bring a cargo to where it goes. I have a people who can work rope and plank till their hands are for it. You have rivers frozen and villages starving. You have an enemy who writes letters with men's skins. You have another enemy who does not write letters at all, but walks in the places where men have danced and leaves nothing that speaks. You have an old castle and an old heart. You do not have time. Davos's mouth twitched. She's not wrong. And what do you ask? Jon said. Asha stacked her fingers on the table, one atop the other precisely, as if counting the holes a salt worm makes in wood. I ask for harbor, she said. I ask for names sworn before gods you heed that will keep my men from hanging for the crimes of their fathers the moment their boots touch your stones. I ask for food traded for work done or men loaned. I ask for one more thing, and it is the deepest river in me. She looked up at him without flinching, and the faces of the clans turned as one, as if they were pines bent by one driving snow. I ask to make a bond strong enough to hold in war and winter, she said. I ask to marry Winterfell. There was a roar of insult and laughter, shock and fury, outrage in old men who had watched Ironborn carry their children from huts at night, in boys who had chopped tar out of ruined walls while smelling a dead man's beard. The red woman's eyes gleamed like live embers. Davos stared as if he had bit a strip of leather and found it sweet. Lyanna's hands were fists the size of stone fruit. Who do you think you are? Glover spat. What lies beneath that iron skin? Jon lifted his hand and the noise paused, like a struck drum waiting for the second beat. The weirwood's red eyes watched. Ghost moved silent as drifted snow to stand at his side, and Asha's gaze flicked to the great white shadow and back again. She did not move. You asked to bind the north and the seas, Jon said. hearing his voice as the thing it had become, neither boys nor commanders nor man's entirely. Why me? Because a castle is a shell, Asha said simply. It is men that give it teeth. The men here follow you as the tide follows the pull of moon and wind. They may call you Stark or Snow or the ghost of one or the shadow of another, but when you walk toward danger they go with you, and when you face them they hold their tongues. I could ask to marry a stone and you would give me stone's love. Hold when it is easy, crack when it is hard. I have no use for that. Lyena's voice cut through. You think marrying a lord will keep your uncle's krakens from their raping? You think a piece of parchment changes the bones on a shore? I do not forget, kraken. Mormont girls don't forget. I know what ironborn did to your island, Asha said, turning to the child as she would to a woman. If any man of mine touches one of yours without her word, he is mine no more. We pay Wergild. We leave your shores untouched by fire. We take nothing that comes from a hand rather than a net. I build that with law. I hold that with my name and the names I choose to stand beside me. Else I fail and you hang me and cast my corpse to the crabs. I have not come to you asking for comfort. And what do you gain? Jon asked. Life, she said. A way to live that is not simply stealing breath from the mouths of those who can't stop you. A way to stand when the snow comes down and the dead step as if dance were a word they learned wrong. A way to spit in my uncle's eye in a language he only half understands. Ships take men north, Lord Snow. Ships take them to places you want them to go. And if I am to give up the reaving way, I will do it not for the sake of Greenland gold, but to set my feet under a roof that does not smell like rot. The council broke into arguing snowdrifts of voices. Jon listened, and he did not. He heard Wyman Manderley's measured gravity through Davos's lips. He heard Umber thunder and saw the flint's thin mouth tighten against a wound that would not scab. He felt the old pull in him toward honor as he had learned it in Winterfell's yard, the quiet honor of Lord Eddard's gaze, the iron honor of the wall that had already cracked under the weight of necessity. He felt another pull that was not duty, but hunger, a hunger for the sea wind that had found him in his godswood, for something not written in the Black Book of Vows. He remembered Robb's marriage and the wolf torn to pieces by men who had been called kin. He remembered Ygritte's blood in the snow and the sound of arrows singing. He remembered the Red Woman's murmur. Shadows have a way of being loyal when men are not. He remembered a letter in a bastard's hand that lied and told the truth at once. In the end, winter is a long siege. You take every stone that will stack and you build. Lyanna, he said quietly, speak for the bears. If the Ironborn come truly to bind to us, if their lady puts law to her words, what will your island say? Lyanna's little chin lifted as if she were facing a wave. She glanced at Asha, at Jon, measured the faces around her as one who had learned to count quickly. We have held Bear Island for 1,000 years, she said. We remember women stolen and boys killed for sport. We remember that the sea brings fish and enemy both. If this kraken gives us her name and the iron to cut the throats of any man who breaks her law, if she returns the women stolen and the boys taken, if she pays Wergild for the dead where she can and kneels at our heart tree, I will not stand in the way of the North choosing to bind salt to snow for a time. But if one Mormont girl is mismarked by one of her men, I will have his head for a ball and his lord's for a cup. Asha nodded once. Done, she said. Glover, Jon asked. We lost men to her, Glover said, and grief made his words heavy. If she comes under law as she says, if she takes our enemies as hers, Bolton's, Frey's, and the Lannister dogs who let them feast, if she fights Euron when he comes, and he will come, then I will not cross my lord if he thinks this marriage a way to keep my folk from starving. But do not ask me to smile at her as if she were my own sister until I know her better. That is more than you gave me, Asha said, a flash of black humor cutting like or through ice. I expected only knives. You'll still get them if you fail us, he said. I expect nothing else. They argued through dusk into night, and when the candles burned low and the wind had risen to shake the shutters like an old hand rattling a bone cup, Jon sent them from him and stood alone with Ghost, who was not alone at all. He sought the godswood because that was where the ground was strongest. The heart tree's face waited without pity or solace. He bowed his head and felt the weirwood's leaning presence like winter itself, patient and immense. "My father," he said to the cold and to the red eyes. "If I take her hand, I bind the north to the sea and the sea to the north. I take an enemy's daughter into your hall. I marry a woman to make a wall where our wall is breaking. You would have said the right of it is in the doing. You would have said a man must keep his word." "My word." He laughed once, soundless. "It is a tattered thing, father. The wall broke it. Knives broke it. Death broke it, or something like it. I have no clean oaths left to burn." The wind through the branches was a hushed answer. Not words, not counsel, only the truth of winter rubbing at bark. Jon rose, feeling the decision like a settling after pain. In the morning he called the hall again. The snow had ceased. The sky was a blue so pale it hurt to look at, as if the world were washed to bone. "Asha Greyjoy," he said into the murmuring dark, "I will marry you." The hall erupted. Some shouted no as if they meant to make it a wall. Some shouted yes with battle-eager voices. Some said nothing and gripped the arms of their chairs until the wood creaked. The red woman's smile was a slit of heat through frost. Davos looked like a sailor who sees a wave bigger than any he has known and sets his feet all the same. Asha did not smile. Her face did not change. Only her shoulders made a motion so small only a man who had lived his life watching would have seen it. And in that motion was relief and flint. "You will want a ceremony," she said, dry as driftwood. "We honor the old gods here," Jon said. "The vows are said beneath the heart tree." "We do it in the surf," she said. "My god is a drowned god with little patience for Greenland pomp. I will kneel at your tree and lay my hand on your bark, and you will kneel at my water and lay your hand in the sea. The rest is words. The rest is law. Then we will give both gods their due," he said. They made a marriage of two weathers. The god's wood was white as bleached bone, breath hanging in the air like ghosts. Asha stood in a dress of thick black wool with a strip of seal at her waist and a knife on her hip bound in a simple sheath. Her hair was unbound and fell like a river of night. Jon wore the cloak that had been Lord Eddard's, gray direwolf on gray, heavy as oaths. Ghost watched with eyes the red of melted heartsap. Lyanna Mormont was there with her stern, unblinking stare. Glover with his old pain. Tormund Giantsbane, the wildling lord, who had come down from the wall to see the thing and called it a fine madness. Wyman Manderly sent his proxy with a hood and the scale of the merman on a chain. Melisandre stood beneath bare branches and smiled at the weirwood's face with a priest's private conversation. Jon took Asha's hand, and she took his, and before the faces of the gods they spoke words old as stone and as simple. "I stand before the eyes of those who remember," Jon said, voice sure. "I take you into my hall and into my name. We will be one in winter and one in war. I will be a shield for you and your people, as you will be a wind for mine." "I stand before a tree that sees blood," Asha said, with a single glance at the red sap. "I lay down the way of the Reaver and take up the law of the North. My men will not raid in your lands. They will not steal from your nets. Any man of mine who breaks this is no man of mine. I take your hand and what it carries, the cold weight and the warm. We will be one in storm and one in calm. I will be a sail when you are too heavy. You will be an anchor when I am too wild." The weirwood's carved mouth did not move. The sound the wind made was not approval and not denial. Jon slipped the gray cloak from his shoulders and set it upon Asha's, fastening it at her throat with the direwolf's head brooch. It lay over the kraken embroidered there, wolf and kraken tangled at her breast, neither devouring the other. They took horses down to the river's bend where it widened and lay open under a thin scab of ice. Men broke the ice with poles and oars until black water showed, and the cold leapt up like a creature eager for a throat. Asha knelt, not shivering, and plunged her hands into the wrists. The water took her skin in its teeth and her breath hissed. "What is dead may never die," she whispered into the winter, "but rises again, harder and stronger." She stood and shook her hands dry, drops flying like chips of broken glass. Jon knelt and put his hands in beside where hers had just been. The cold bit and bit and bit. He thought of the chill of the other death and did not pull free. They stood with water freezing at their cuffs and the steam of their breath mingling, and the people of two hard lands watching and worrying the edges of their knives with their thumbs. When Asha kissed him, it was brief and warmer than the air had any right to be. Word ran like foxes among the pines. The kraken had married the wolf. The sea had married the snow. In the kitchens they told the tale with the old relish people have for the idea that their own day is one that will be spoken of later. In the small rooms where soldiers slept two to a bed, they wondered if the ironborn would try their doors at night. On the walls, men looked north and then east to where the water lay. Asha took stock of what she had bought and what she had promised. She walked the docks of White Harbor beside Davos and Wyman's men and taught them knots they did not know. She sent her fiercest reavers back to the Black Wind and kept them on a short rope of her own. She set clever boys from Deepwood to learning the sea as men put to learning swords. She stood in the merman's court and paid Wergild tea. Oh, weeping women with green ink still under their nails from counting fish. She stood before a row of boys who had arms like saplings and eyes like old men and promised them that the men who had taken their sisters would wish to be dead before she was done. Word drifted down from the wall like froth on a wave. Hard home. It came in a letter from Cotter Pike scrawled with a hand that looked like it had been frozen and thawed twice over. Dead things moving in the woods, winds that carried voices that were not voices, a night that had stopped being a time and become a presence. There had been a signal fire and then a cloud like a dark wing over the bay. They need ships, John said, showing Asha the letter in the pale light of the tower room that had been his father's. They cannot get men by land. Hardhome is a hard place, Asha said, looking at the scratch of lines that marked the bay. Rocks like teeth, currents that drag like a jealous lover. I can bring boats to her shore if the wind is right and the tide's not biting like a dog. We'll need oars and brave fools and the gods' leavings. We have brave fools, John said, and the gods, if they are here, have been poor in their leavings lately. She grinned sideways at that, surprised into the expression as if it had not asked permission. I will take the Black Wind, she said. I want Manderley's stoutest cogs for drag, and the smallest fishing smacks for the run-in. We go light and we go fast. We take men who won't piss their britches when the water slaps the hull. You come with me. He met her eyes and nodded. Ido. They made ready before dawn, when even the cold seemed to sleep and the world was a rumor. Davos went with them, because he would not let ships go to their fate without a man who knew what fate cost. Tormund came because laughter in the face of the dead is a charm of its own, and because giants bane or no, he had come to like the way Asha shouted orders from her prow, fierce and precise. Ghost went because Ghost went where John went, and if he hated the boat, he did not suffer at once on board. The clan sent archers who had never stood on a deck, their eyes sharp and stomachs stubborn, and Asha put them to work with ropes until their hands blistered and toughened. Melisandre did not come, and John did not ask why. They rowed east under a dawn the color of old pewter, the sea as flat as hammered tin. The Black Wind knew the way. Asha stood with the tiller snug in her hand and the wind making a banner of her hair. John set his feet as she had taught him and found that the sea spoke one language to men who listened and another to those who did not. It told him that the cold that came from the north was not the cold of winter alone. It told him that under its skin things moved that never came up to breathe. They saw Hardhome as a line of rocks and gray shacks spiked like porcupine quills along the shore. Smoke smeared the sky in bruised fingers. Fire winked and went, like the last fireflies of a season. As they drew near, a sound came to them that was not wind, not gulls, not the slap of water on wood. It was a human sound stretched on a rack. A scream drawn so thin it seemed a thread that might snap. Row, Asha said, not shouting. The oars took the water and the boat leapt, and behind them Manderley's cogs moved like fat geese hustled by sharp dogs. The small fishing boats scattered to pry the shallows for survivors. The Black Wind aimed for the worst of it. The shore teemed with people, men, women, children wrapped in furs gray with salt, with eyes like polished stones. They clung to one another and to driftwood, and everywhere among them moved things that had once been people and now were not. The whites came with a movement that misremembered walking and a hunger that remembered everything. The sound of them was the sound of creaking wood and cracking ice and boots on bone. Jon's first arrow took one through the eye, the second planted in a mouth that never cried out. Tormund leapt from the bow when the boat was still a length from shore and waded through water up to his thighs, laughing like a man who believes rage is a kind of warmth. Asha's orders cut like a thrown knife. This boat to this clump of children, that to that mass of old folk. Archers aim not for breast but for skull. Knife men cut legs from under, then arms, then necks. If the head remains, don't fall for the trick of a pretty face you once knew. Davos shouted to keep the oars moving. The cogs loomed farther out, ready to pull survivors from boats that would onload and on-turn and on-go. Jon hit the shore, long claw in his hand, lighting the air with the breath of 100 fallen men. The blade took a white at the hip and it collapsed like rope cut quick. Something colder moved behind the whites. The air around it was so still it made the wind itself seem a liar. It had the shape of a man made of moonlight on snow. Its sword was thin and pale and sharp enough to slice silence. He saw it see him. He stepped between a knot of children and that gaze. Ghost burst out of the surf like a thing carved from ice, teeth a spatter of froth. The other's sword swung, and the sound it made on Longclaw was the scream of winter turning on stone. Jon's arm rang to the shoulder. The thing smiled with no warmth in it at all. "Asha," Jon grunted. He did not know if she heard him over the ropes and oars and arrows and the terrible small sounds of dying. But she was there at his flank in the time it took to draw one breath and set another. She had a dragonglass dagger in her hand, black as truth. The Lady of Harlaw had told him once, in the days before the world tilted, that Asha had a knife she had kept and kept. He did not know if this was that knife. He did not care. She did not charge, did not leap. She watched the other's feet, and when it moved to mirror Jon's feint, when it brought its thin, cold blade down to meet his, she went low and forward and put the dagger in the blue-white place where ribs might be on a man. The sound it made was the crack that comes when a pond ice gives under a heavy boot. The thing folded like a flung cloak, and where it fell there was nothing that belonged to men. "You owe me a drink," Asha said, breath smoking and eyes bright as iron. "You can have a cask," Jon managed, and then there was no more talk. They took 3 boats full in the first run, 4 and a handful in the second. Children howled and women moved in lines that had learned too swiftly how to pass the small bodies hand to hand without dropping them. Men fought and then turned and carried and then turned and fought, and those who did neither were beyond both. The black horn of some unknown tribe sounded on a ridge, and something windowless and watching moved there like a shadow. Snow began to fall in fat flakes that clung and weighed, and the rocks gleamed like seals at low tide. Asha kept count like a woman at market counting fallen apples. 52 in the first hour, 111 by the time the light had turned the color of bruised plums. They lost 3 boats to the shallows where bones lay like reefs, and 1 to hands that grasped it and pulled it under. Tormund came back with blood up to his thighs and a child under his arm and his own laugh gone. Davos set his jaw and rode until the old burns on his fingers bled again, and he made no sound at all. Ghost leapt and tore and shook, and his white fur ran red down the legs. On the last run, when the dark had come down like a cloak and the cold had begun to speak in a voice loud enough to frighten, the shore wavered and was lost and found again, and found full of whites in a number that made numbers silly. Jon felt fear, and in it a kind of odd clarity, as if fear were a lens. He put his back to Asha's, and they moved like men who had trained together through winter after winter, though they had not. He cut, and she cut, and Ghost cut what neither of them could reach. The children they had set in the bottom of the boat did not cry. Asha had told them not to, and her voice had been the sea's. A shape taller than tall stepped out of the dark, pale blade set like a star. Its hair was frost hung on nothing. Its eyes were the blue of night skies over the sea. Its breath smoked, and the smoke smelt of old graves. It moved toward a boy with a face like a closed fist. Jon stepped between. The world narrowed to the place where the other's blade would meet his. It swung, and the scream of ice on steel ran up his arm and into his teeth. His knee hit the cold stones. The thing raised its blade with a slow grace that mocked his breathless hurry. Asha's hand closed on his shoulder and hauled him aside with a strength that a lifetime aboard decks had taught her. The pale blade came down where his head had been and stuck in the stone with a sound like a bell being struck far away. She pushed the dragonglass dagger into his hand without looking and took Longclaw for herself as if she had been born to it. He threw himself up, moved under the swing, and drove the black blade into the place under the thing's arm where a man's heart might dream of beating. Came apart like hoarfrost in sunlight. Longclaw in Asha's hand flashed and was back again. The boy's eyes were wide and wet. She took his chin in one rough hand and turned him toward the boat. "We go," she said, and he went. They left a quarter of the folk of Hardhome on the beach because winter and the dead are always faster than men. Jon would remember their faces in the long hours of not sleep that winter keeps, and Asha would hear the sound of the sea struck by oars for a year after. They came back to Eastwatch with the boats heavy and the hearts of men raw, and the watchmen on the wall stared down with faces like carved stone, because the thing below looked like a story no one had wanted to tell. "Ships?" said Cotter Pike, his beard cracking with salt and cold. "We'll do what walls cannot. I hate ships. I'll have 'em anyway." They fed the rescued at Winterfell. Wyman Manderley opened his larders with a careful hand and did not make the open chests into a sermon. The Mormonts sent fish and hard bread. The rescued brought stories whose edges cut. Of a cold that thinks, of lights moving like schools of fish in water that was air, of voices that promised and hands that broke. They brought skills. The way to lay out a net on ice and pull up something that still moved. The way to bind a foot that had been frozen so it would remember walking again. They brought chaos to the quiet that winter tries to make, and the quiet was a little better with it. Discontent came too because peace is as loud as war. Men who had lost sons to ironborn knives watched Asha's men teaching their boys to splice rope and listened for betrayal in their laughter. Ironborn who had never before lived a day without the right to take what their hand could seize woke and found their hands empty and did not always love the law that had made it so. Asha moved among them as if she were walking a yardarm in a gale. Each step measured, each hand offered or withheld with care. When one of her men struck a Wintertown girl's backside with a slick hand and a thoughtless grin, Asha called him before the heart tree and cut his ear for the law he had broken. She held the ear up like a flag and did not flinch as the blood ran down her wrist. "This is the price," she said to the watching faces. "There will be others if there must be. I do not keep men to see them make me a liar." After, Jon found her washing the blood from her hand in the black water that had once been a pool and would be a pool again in some other season. The steam of her breath made a wreath that the wind stole. "You could have hanged him," Jon said. "I could," she said, looking at her fingers as if they were maps. "I will if the law asks me to and if it will buy quiet more cheaply than chaos will. But a dead man cannot row. He cannot build. He cannot go home and tell his sons that if they play the Reaver in a Northman's hall, they will return with less of themselves than they left with. You are changing your people," he said. She laughed without humor and shook her hand, flinging black drops. "No one changes a people quickly," she said. "One man will not leave off flour because you tell him salt is better. He must swallow salt till his mouth forgets sweeter things. So we salt our mouths here a while. I make my people remember that they have more choices than steal and starve. In time, if we live, their sons will think they were born to those choices. Will you take your ships south again?" he asked. The question had a taste to it he had not put there. "I would like to put my uncle in the sea and hold him down until the bubbles stop," she said conversationally. "I would like to stand in the mermaid's court with his tongue in a jar and sell it to Wyman by weight. But I cannot. Euron's fleet is in the Sunset Lands, drunk on arbor wine and the screams of women. He will turn his head north when the wine runs out or when a thing sheds a flake of dragon skin and he wants it. Until then, the seas are mine, and I would use them to take your men where they want to go. I am not done at Hardhome. There are more like it." Jon nodded. He had never loved the sea. He trusted its depth no more than the black of a deep winter night. But he had learned to trust the hands on his shoulder at the moment a pale blade swung. "I will go with you again," he said. She lifted one brow. Of course you will. You are not a man who sits in chairs long. Some days I wish I were, he said. Some days I wish I were a gull, she said. They have no laws. He took her hand then, and she let him. Her fingers were calloused in a way very different from a swordsman's. Broad where rope had burned, knotted where oars had bit, scarred in little moons from the teeth of salt and wood. He raised her hand to his mouth and kissed the place where the earblood had washed away and left the skin pale. They took hard men and brave fools back to Eastwatch and then north to places that were more names than places. Asha taught the watch how to lay pickets at sea as they would on land. She taught the clans how to row without fighting the water. The next time another came, it did not find men afraid of its beauty. It found a knife that remembered where ribs grew wrong in its kind, and it learned again the lesson of Blackstone and the way it loves cold hearts. Winter deepened. The snow came heavier, and the business of living in it made the days full and strange. Ghost hunted things that had learned to hide under snow. Men learned not to speak too loudly at night, as if the air might carry their words away to listening ears. Children in the winter town played a new game, Kraken and Wolf, where one chased and one held ground, and the main rule was that you changed sides often and never forgot which side you had been on last. Word reached them of Sansa in the Vale, of Arya nowhere and everywhere, of Rickon who might be on an island with wolves whose eyes were yellow and too bright. Jon listened to the word and felt it move inside him like warm water poured into cold hands. He did not set off running. He had learned not to. Theon came in a gray day and walked under the arch as if the stones might ask for a debt. He had 3 fingers missing on one hand and a look in his eyes like a winter fire left too long untended. The hall became a bow strung to breaking. Glover rose halfway and then caught himself by the arm of his chair, white-knuckled. Lyanna's mouth went thin. Ghost's hackles bristled. The White Wolf's low growl was a word men do not know. Asha went to meet her brother at the quarter between doors and hearth, and they stood looking like 2 halves of something not built by any human plan. She put her hand on the side of his face like a woman would put a hand on a horse that had known cruelty. "You look like a knot," she said, voice so soft that a hush fell to hear it. "I am," he said through lips that had learned to keep in screams. "I am sorry, Asha," he swallowed. He looked past her at Jon, and pain and a want that had no name put water in his eyes. "I am sorry," he said again, and his voice broke. Jon stood. He did not go forward. He remembered 2 boys hanging from Winterfell's walls, their faces burlap-wrapped and small. He remembered boys with green eyes and a girl with hair like autumn. He saw a man who had been made small in a way knives can do to men. "We have laws now," Asha said, in a voice that was not a sister's or a wife's but a lord's. "In the north and on the sea. Theon Greyjoy took Winterfell once, when boys were boys and wolves were scattered. Men did wickedness in his name or with his allowance. He saved a girl and he saved himself, and he crawled back to me at a cost I would not have asked him to pay. He will answer for what the law says he must answer for. He will live as the law says he lives. That is all." Glover's breath burst out of him with a sound like a cut rope. He sat. The hall loosened one very small degree. Jon nodded once, because this was not a debt he could pay or forgive for others. It was a weight he would keep on the shelf with the others. That night Jon and Asha lay in the bedchamber with stone on 3 sides and wind on the 4th, and the furs heavy enough to hold down thoughts. They spoke in the way that men do when the dark is around them and the day's demands have been fed and put to bed. "Do you regret this?" she asked, not hiding from the thing that had hands on them both. He considered. He had learned to consider. "No," he said. "I regret we didn't have more time to make the world ready for it. But the world doesn't wait." "No," she said. "It drags you like a net." She turned on her side and set her hand over his heart, the way a captain sets her palm on a new plank to feel if it will hold. He moved his fingers through her hair. Outside, the wind found a loose slate and began a small, maddening tapping. He thought of the other's sword and the dragonglass bite. He thought of the boy on Hardhome's shore. He thought of Lyanna Mormont's small, hard chin, and Theon's broken eyes, and Davos's fingers bleeding onto oars. He thought of his father's hand on his shoulder a lifetime ago and of a red woman's soft voice saying kings are born in blood. Asha's breath warmed his throat. "We will have to go to Harlaw," she said into the dark. "My uncle Roderick, the reader, will give us the men he can and the words worth keeping. He has books, a thing few ironborn remember how to keep without wrapping them in oilcloth against the sea. You think he'll side with you against Euron? I know only that Roderick loves words more than wine and women, which makes him unlike most of my island. He will see the law I am building and he will measure it against the old way and he will count pearls. Euron thinks pearls are things you crush in your teeth. If we go, we will go quick and quiet, and you will send me with men who can hold a door until the sea tires of pushing against it." "You think I would not go with you?" Jon said. She laughed once, breath warm at his ear. "I think you are a man who does not sit in chairs long," she said, and then her hand tightened against his heart in the first of a series of pressures that had nothing to do with war. They went as the year turned its face deeper into the snow. The black wind led, a shadow on gray water under gray skies. The other ships tucked in her wake as goslings tuck under mother's wing. Jon had left Winterfell with Lyanna Mormont's glower and blessing, with Wyman's accounting of stores and his warning not to linger in any harbor where the lions flew, with Tormund's promise. To keep the wildlings from setting fire to anything that looked like a tree for warmth, and with Davos's fingers clapped to his shoulder. "At sea," Davos said, and the words carried weight of things buried and unburied. "You trust your captain and your God, and sometimes only the first of those is of use." "I trust my wife," Jon said. "Then you will see home again," Davos said. "If the sea remembers kindness." Harlaw rose from the water like the back of a gray beast. The weeping water's cliffs had tears frozen in the clefts, white against black rock. 10 towers thrust at the sky, windows cut like wounds. Asha's jaw tightened as they came into the lee, and Jon felt in her the tug of home, a thing that pulls and cuts at once. Roderick Harlaw, the reader, met them in a hall that smelt of oil and old leather and old fish. He had a book in his hands and the look of a man who does not smile easily because he respects the cost of it. "Niece," he said, and kissed Asha on both cheeks, salt in his beard. "You have brought winter into my hall, and a wolf." "A lord," she said. "My husband." Roderick's eyes rested on Jon with the weight of assessment and the thin light of curiosity. "My island remembers wolves," he said. "They rooted us out like worms from a well once. It did not kill us. We went to sea. We need you on land and water both," Asha said. "Euron sends mutes with horns and men with no fear of drowning. He will reach for Harlaw when he runs out of the Reach's wine. Help me make a law that keeps my people alive and strips him of the stories he tells them." Roderick's fingers stroked the book's spine once. "I have read the stories," he said. "Men like your uncle grow fat on the ones that end in fire. Your father loved the old stories, but he did not eat them. He ate bread. He understood hunger. My father also loved theft," Asha said flatly. "I have no taste for starving. I have no taste for theft when I can trade. I have a husband who needs ships more than he needs fish. I have dead men walking in the north and the promise of a war that will not stop at the shores." Roderick's mouth twitched, perhaps the shadow of the thing men bring out when they are about to smile. "You make a better book than most," he said to Jon. "What does the North read in this new chapter?" "That the dead move like water," Jon said. "That the cold thinks. That if you build a house without a roof because you like the feel of the rain on your face, your children will drown. The North will pay for wood and rope and men. It will pay Wergild for any old wrongs that law says it must pay when proof is brought. It will hang men who break our laws and send women home who were taken under old ones when proof is brought. And it will march when the time comes. I need ships to take my men where the wall is not." Roderick nodded slowly. "Euron's horn speaks a language I do not believe in," he said. "It will cost him and others their lungs to blow. That is a comfort. I have men who will follow you because you are who you are, Asha. I have others who will follow you because the law offers them a life with more than one good day in it. I have a third kind who will not follow you because they love to cut throats and call it their god. For the third kind, we have doors and knives. They made a plan that had books in it and blood. Roderick sent ravens with words that struck at pride and hope equal. He opened his armories and pulled out mail that did not smell of drowning. He set aside bales of wool for the north, marked for White Harbor. Asha walked the docks of 10 Towers, where iron had been black iron for 1,000 years, and she said ships like prayers and numbers like curses. Jon learned the way of their holds and the measure of their sails, and let the sea right itself into the way. He stood in a way no other man would see. Euron did not come while they were there. He would later, like a storm that has been building beyond the horizon long after a man has dried his deck and thought the day his. But for that winter it was another war that pressed. They turned north again, coffers of rope heavy and men stiffer-backed than when they had arrived, and the black wind cut through gray water like a needle through cloth. On the way home, the sea froze, not all of it, not the wide deeps, but in the Bay of Seals, the skin glazed over the top like a mirror gone mad, and the ships pushed in it with a sound like biting into an apple. Asha called the men from the oars and set them to poles as if they were punting upriver. On the wind Jon smelt something that was not sea and not snow and not any living thing. It was a lack, a hollow, a space where heat went to weep. The world went quiet in the way a room goes quiet when someone enters who will break everything if allowed. A shape rose in the white ahead. At first Jon took it for a small hill of ice. Then it moved. It was a line of figures, pale as milk under moonlight, moving with the grace of things that never learned to breathe. They walked onto the skin of the bay as if it were shore. "Backwater," Asha said. Her voice did not jump. It did not break. "Backwater, backwater, backwater." The poles bit. The ship slid like dull knives on frozen fat. The other at the head of the column turned its head, and its eyes found the black shape of the black wind. It lifted its hand, and the air around it grew so quiet Jon thought of church bells he had never rung. A crack laced the ice at its feet, spider-webbing outward. Through the crack rose hands. Not living, never living. The whites came up from under the ice like secrets and began to pull themselves onto the black mirror. "Archers," Jon said, and men moved who had never fired from boats, who had learned because Asha had put bows in their hands until their palms toughened. The arrows hissed and took the skulls of 5, 10. The rest came on. Asha's mouth thinned. "Ramming speed," she said, and the men looked at her like she was mad. And then they looked again and saw that mad was all that would have them. They rammed ice. The black wind drove her sharpened bow into the skin of the bay with an impact that threw men to their knees. The ice cracked and plunged in sheets. Whites fell and arms broke in half, and the water took them the way the sea takes everything, without judgment. Behind them Manderly's cogs came on heavy and unstoppable, breaking the ice into islands, then islands into floes, then floes into chunks. The ironborn shouted wordless sea cries. The clansmen shouted the names of their women and their gods. The others stepped light as thought and moved as if on glass that did not break. "That one," Asha said, and there was no need to say to Jon which. He knew it as men know their hunters. They closed not by choice but because there was only forward left to go. The black wind slewed, set. Men with long gaffs hooked whites and flipped them like fish. Jon leapt for an ice sheet, boots sliding. The sound under him, the groan of the world under a weight it did not love. The other moved to meet him, sword a whisper. It swung. He felt the air that sword made like a cutting wind. He parried, and the sound was the sound he had heard before, the sound that crawled down bones. He stepped in, not back, and he felt Asha at his shoulder without seeing her. Her dragonglass cut, black lightning. Another of the pale things fell apart like horror. The leader came on, calm as the slow pull of tide. Ghost leapt and found nothing to take hold of with his teeth. He landed and slid and scrabbled and found purchase where no purchase was, because Ghost was made of the same winter as the thing they fought. The other swung, elegant, and cut Ghost along the flank. The white fur parted. Blood as bright as berries dotted the ice. Jon saw nothing else for a moment. He moved faster than his fear, and in that movement there was something older than law, older than winter, older than men who stand and men who kneel. He took the dragon glass from Asha's hand without looking and flung himself under the cut that would have taken his head clean. He drove the blade up, under, into the place where the thing's chest might have held a story about hearts. It did not make a sound. It shattered in a silence that was its whole life. A wave rolled under the ice then, a simple thing, a thing the sea had taught itself to do. The ice heaved and broke, and the others who had not fallen stepped back as if the sea had tugged their ankles. The black wind's prow came through with a scream of wood on frozen water. Men leaned on poles and pushed, sweated, swore, prayed. The cogs smashed and the ice gave and the bodies slid and the bay became water again in big dark breaths. The others looked at the boats and then at the far shore and then at the sky in a way that said nothing a man could read. And then they passed away into the white, as if the world had blinked and lost them. Asha looked down at Ghost with eyes that had gone soft around the edges. "He lives," she said, rough. "He bleeds, but he lives." John felt his own breath re-enter his body in one long shudder. He went to his knees and put his hands on Ghost's fur, hot and slick. The wolf's tongue lolled and then fell back in his mouth in a grin that made a mock of gravity. He licked John's wrist and Asha's scarred fingers with equal democratic adoration. "Good boy," John said. He did not care who heard his voice break. They limped back to White Harbor bruised and ragged and alive, and men called it a victory because men need words like that to keep walking. Wyman Manderley had his cook slaughter a long-stalled pig, and there was broth greasy enough to warm even ironborn. Men told the tale of a woman's black knife and a man's black sword kissing cold and making it shatter. They told the tale of a wolf who bled bright and leapt and laughed at death. Tales keep men upright longer than meat. John stood on the pier where salt dried white on the timbers and watched the water go about its business as if it had not just tried to kill them and save them both. Asha came and stood beside him and did not speak at first, which is one of the reasons he had come to love her. "Your people will follow you," he said, "not for blood alone, not for law alone, because you take their lives into your hand and you do not drop them when they are heavy." "My people," she said, and something moved under the word that made it a larger thing, "will follow me until some of them do not. Then I will cut those away and hope the rest learn from the cutting. That is all any of us do, Wolf." He looked sidelong at her. The wind snatched a lock of her hair and played with it and then repented and put it back. Her mouth was set in a shape that had become familiar and dear to him. Stubborn, amused at her own stubbornness, aware of the ridiculousness of loving anything in a world like this and determined to do it anyway. "This is not how I thought my life would go," he said simply. "That is a thing men say when their lives go well," she said. "When they go ill, they know they would never have thought it. Does your life go well, Lord Snow? I am married to a woman who laughs at me and cuts ice that thinks it is a king to pieces," he said dryly. "I sleep with the wind for a blanket and wake to soup and law and the sound of men learning not to be fools. It goes as well as winter allows." She bumped his shoulder with hers, a sailor's affectionate violence. "We will make it better," she said. "We will make the summer that comes after. It will smell of tar and pine both." They went back to Winterfell with the ships, long and short. The gates opened and the smell of stew came out to meet them, and Tormund shouted that they had been gone long enough for him to have learned to sew, which was a threat and a promise. Lioness stood on the stairs, chin high, and gave Asha a nod that could mean everything and nothing. Theon stood in shadow as if the light hurt him and made himself small. Ghost limped with dignity to the hearth he had chosen and threw himself down like a king with his wounds dressed and his thanks given. The marriage did what they had promised it would. It did not change hearts overnight. It did not heal all old hurts. But men went to sea when they needed to and came back again, and no one burned a village for the sport of it. Men took oaths in front of trees and in front of water and found they could keep them. Davos's hands stopped bleeding and began to toughen again in the pattern of a sailor's long use. Manderley learned that Ironborn eat just as much as Northmen and can drink a little more, and he adjusted his casks accordingly. The rescued from Hardhome built a village of their own a mile from the winter town and taught the Mormont boys how to fish in ice, and the Mormont boys taught them how to cut a track through pines without waking a bear. Euron sent a letter eventually, because men like him cannot keep their mouths from saying their own names. It came wrapped in a skin with his sigil painted in something red that pretended not to be what it was. It told Asha that the sea would take her because the sea was his to command, and it told Jon that kings who used oars would end beneath them. They read it by the kitchen fire, and Asha used it to start the blaze the next morning. The wet leather stank and the flames took slow. Winter does not end because men wish it. It ends because the world remembers how. When the first thaw came, it came like a tired man going to his knees in stages in efforts. Snow slumped off the Godswood's branches in slow, careful falls. The river began under the ice before anyone heard it. Then one day there was a sound in the yard at dawn like someone snapping a bundle of kindling, and men went to the bend to watch the river wake. Children cheered and hurled stones to break more of the ice than had already broken, as if they were helping. They were, in the way that matters, they were making noise that was not fear. Jon stood beneath the heart tree in the Godswood with Asha and listened to the water run. It smelt of earth. The weirwood's red eyes did not weep as much today, or else the sap was frozen in another place and it would start again tomorrow. The sky was a gray you could imagine being blue in some other time. "You have brought the sea into my house," he said. "It was a good theft. You have brought law into mine," she said. "I call it even." He reached for her hand. She gave it. The tree watched. Ghost slept, snoring a little, a sound like a bellows. The world moved as it does forward. "It will not be easy," he said. "It will never be easy," she answered. "But it will be ours." They stood there while the river talked to itself, and after a time the sound of men moving in the yard joined it, and then the sound of women laughing, and the crack of a training sword on a shield, and the bark of a dog. The sea will never stop trying to come in. The land will never stop trying to hold it out. Between the two, men build things worth keeping for as long as they can be kept. The wolf and the kraken stood their watch together, and winter, which had no eyes and no love for men, passed on regardless. But it left behind, in that hall, a thing winter never knows what to do with and always loses to. It left a bond, made of wood and iron, water and snow, tempered by cold and made strong by the hands that kept it.